What's good, everybody? It's the real AG, and you are back and locked in to Kingdom Keys with yours truly here on the Lockdown Defense Sports Network. This is where we break down everything red and gold from Arrowhead to hopefully back to that AFC throne. We are bringing you one final recap video for the Kansas City Chiefs 2025 season. Basically before we wash our hands with this filth and just move on to better and brighter pastures for 2026. But, for 2025 overall, it was just rough. I don't think it's too far-fetched to, call this season a major disappointment, if you will, for what the Chiefs that we are used to seeing kind of in this Reid and Mahomes era. It's what it was, just a disappointing season. Not a whole lot of great happened. A whole lot of bad happened. We're going to go through all of that and then talk about what my keys are for the offseason so that we see the Chiefs return to form as we've seen in this dynastic run they've been on for 2026. So kind of recapping 2025 first. As I said, it was a major disappointment. You see the finishing numbers right there. 6-11 record, finished third in the AFC West, secured the number 9 pick in the 2026 draft. It was the franchise's first losing season since 2012, so pretty much since Reid has been the coach, which is just, a testament to how great of a run it's been, and I hope it's not over, but, just wild for how great they were for so long before there were cracks in the pipes, if you will. And snapped their 9-year win streak of winning the division. Missed the playoffs for the first time since 2014. And like I said, got that number 9 pick, which is the first time in that Reid Veach era that the team has held a top 10 pick, that they didn't trade for, I should say. Although I guess that was John Dorsey, but you know what I mean, Chiefs fans. But, I think just looking at big picture as a whole, the Chiefs, in my opinion, did not fail in 2025 for one, specific reason or one problem. If you were really, they fell short, to a litany of issues. First and foremost, a confluence of injuries, if you will, a lot of offensive and defensive inefficiencies, mostly on the offense, but we'll get to that, but scattered throughout the year. Just a lack of personnel at times during the season, a lot of situational mistakes in games, performance issues down the stretch, and really just the overall inability to make the plays that once defined this Chiefs dynasty. So, like I said, it's just a major disappointment. I hope this is not them returning to the Chiefs of old. I hope they can make the right moves this offseason to return to form or at least be competitive and down, in it to the end of the regular season. But, time will tell. Time will tell if the Chiefs can, fix some of these issues and move on. But I think, one thing I'll say from the jump, I just hope that Veach, the front office, and the coaching staff, and I think they do by some of the moves that we've seen, but I just hope that they know this, taking this run it back approach that they've been taking in the past few years, which I can't really blame them because they did almost always make it to a Super Bowl. I hope they know that that's not going to work anymore. Like, we got to see some major changes to this team and how this team is constructed moving into the future, for this championship window to still be open, if you will. That's just kind of my top-down big picture for the offseason. But, we're going to finish recapping 2025 first. But, the run it back mantra can be no more after what happened in 2025. So, hopefully you guys know at this point, though, I am somewhat of a glass half full guy. You watched every one of my Kingdom Keys throughout the season. I constantly was picking the Chiefs to win and, quote, right the ship or get back on track, when really, if you go back and look at it now, some of those signs, I don't know what signs I was looking at. Maybe just blind faith in a team that's always seemed to have that mystique and aura to be successful. But, a lot of these issues and problems that we saw, were present early and stayed. throughout. But, you know, I like to take the good with the bad, if you will. So we are going to talk about some positives that I tried to find from 2025, which I'm calling, the kingdom come up. So first and foremost, I think what was undoubtedly confirmed, not that it really needed much confirming, maybe not to the Chiefs kingdom itself, but outside the kingdom. I mean, Patrick Mahomes is 100% him. I mean, if anybody was questioning that, I think even after we've watched these playoffs, you can just see how special and elite of a quarterback he truly is, and what he has been able to mask when fully healthy, and has the right pieces around him, if you will. But yeah, I mean, we obviously saw how important he was to this Chiefs offense, because I mean, once he did go down, the same group of players that he was working with all year long were routinely unable to find the end zone. I mean, there was literally no offense once Mahomes went down with his unfortunate injury, which we will kind of get to that as well. But I mean, if anything, just how poorly the end of the season went, that shows just how great Patrick Mahomes is. I mean, obviously tragic how he ended the season with a torn ACL, but we have to have faith. I have faith that he will come back better, stronger, and even more motivated to make things happen here in 2026 and beyond. I mean, he was still playing great. Before the injury, he had 3,500 pass yards, 22 touchdowns, a career high 422 rushing yards, which is something I hope to never say again in his career. Good enough to be named the team's MVP with the Derek Thomas Award. Not that many people, I mean, not that there's really any other valuable player to point at, but we did confirm that Mahomes is him. There was some individual player success. Like I said, Mahomes was looking good before the injury. Creed Humphrey, named first team All-Pro. Creed and Kelsey were both all AFC honors teams. So, I mean, are getting some recognition in the individual success. I think there was some young O-line growth or development that we saw. Obviously, first-round pick in 2025, Josh Simmons, and the left guard, Kingsley Suma-Matea. I think both showed elite promise when they were out there. I mean, those were two guys that also fit into that barrage of injuries I talked about earlier. But really, outside of right tackle, I think the Chiefs appear to have a strong long-term unit in place with those two guys and Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith. We did see some positive on-field development at times, when the Chiefs were healthy, kind of in that peak, when they were buzzing really from that Giants week 3, on to really after the Bills game. But it kind of in that window, week 3 to week 8. I mean, there was some good moments. They were pretty healthy. We saw some, like I said, on-field development, particularly with the playmakers like Rashee Rice and Worthy. They both were contributing, to the overall explosiveness of the offense before, really those injuries and other setbacks kind of kicked in. The man who got the graphic nod here, we got Ashton Gelati, rookie D-end. He showed to make an impact really all year. And, shout out to him. He did earn the team's Rookie of the Year award, so hopefully he can build off that and continue to be a good cog in the pass rush machine. And at the end of the day, man, for what this team was, they still had a very dominant run defense, and in my opinion, an elite defensive core to move forward with. I mean, they really were stout against the run all year. Every team they played that was, going into the game pretty good against the run, like they capped them all great. I think allowed just a little under 4 yards per carry on first down, so fifth lowest rate in the league. And like I said, really, Chris Jones continued to play. They have Trent McDuffie, like the core was there. Bolton, those guys played well. I think to show that they could still build an elite defense around that core of players moving forward. But that's really it for the positives of 2025. I mean, with the 6-11 season, there's your kind of grasping at straws that have more than 5 positive points. But that's our kingdom come ups. As my man coach says, we got to take the good with the bad. So now we got to go to the kingdom's cracks. Positive needed there on that title. But the overall bad from 2025. I mean, first and foremost, we had a lot of season-defining injuries. Mahomes with the late ACL tear against the Chargers. On top of that, I mean, Minshew got hurt immediately following in the next game, which left the Chiefs with their third-string quarterback for the rest of the year when they were still kind of in it. I mean, that was just talk about kicking someone while they're down in that regard. Big injury to Xavier Worthy, like second play of this freaking season in Brazil against the Chargers. In my opinion, I think that killed the offensive momentum that they were building all preseason, because you could very clearly tell in that game, like they were banking on Worthy to take a huge step forward and be a big part of the offense. He goes down running a mesh route with Kelsey, second or third drive play of their first drive, and was out for a while. I mean, they pretty much went the first 6 weeks without a true number one wide receiver, with Worthy being out or banged up and Rashee Rice dealing with the suspension. On top of that, what I think led to the Mahomes injury a little bit too, O-line was banged up all year. Like I noted, Kingsley Suamataia had concussion issues pretty much for the latter part of the season. Jawan Taylor had an ankle leg injury that seemed to hamper him, among other issues with him. Trey Smith had an ankle injury that kept him out at times. So, I mean, those guys are banged up, and two of them, or one of them, was arguably the best right guard in the NFL. So, kind of a problem when he's out. But that they were unable to kind of keep that core together consistently. On top of that, you got players like Leo Chanel, Rashee Rice, McDuffie, and Jalen Watson. All suffered injuries at some point. So that's, never good when you got injuries like that compiling. We also saw a big regression in those close games. I mean, the Chiefs were historically poor in 2025 in one-score games, which has usually been one of their strengths during this run. I mean, they went 1-9 in those games, which I think just really highlights the 2025 Chiefs' inability to make those game-deciding plays late, like that we are used to seeing out of that unit. You just didn't see that. So I think you couple that injuries and just that, like, just things did not go their way this year. We saw a lot of offensive struggles, a lot of predictability in the offense. Just as a whole, the offense underperformed relative to previous years. They were well down in the bottom half of the league in yards and points per game. I think had a clear lack of explosive playmaking, or consistent explosive playmaking, I should say, and to balance attack. Essentially had no run game outside of a few bright spots from old buck Kareem Hunt, which is just not something you want to say for what is supposed to be a contending AFC offense. They had a lot of wide receiver core issues, just injuries, like I talked about, Worthy, Rashee's suspension, Marquise Brown banged up. The Tyquan Thornton was wide receiver one for a couple weeks due to injuries. So you just couple that with just uneven performances week in and week out. That really just limited their passing game. And then, on top of that, we had Reed and Nagy's schemes just criticized all year. You could tell it was very predictable what they were doing. There was just a clear lack of creativity. It just seemed to let's just roll, kind of what Hollywood does now. Like, let's just remake a movie from the 80s and people will pay to see it. Like, Chiefs are like, let's just run the same stuff we've been running during this run and no one's going to stop it. And there was just no response to that, or no adaptability to move off of that, or really the creativity to find new outlets to scoring. So really they just, they failed all year to consistently scheme receivers open for Mahomes. And a lot of people at the end of the year were questioning Andy Reid and whether the offensive play calling and just decisions, were getting stale and lack that adaptability. And I didn't think they should move on from Andy Reid. Some people do. I can see the argument, but at the end of the day, like, come on, Andy Reid has given Kansas City and the Chiefs enough to decide when he's done coaching for him, in my opinion. For what this franchise was before that, like, the guy is quite on the map. So, give him time to figure it out. I think he will, as long as he still wants to coach. But and we'll get into some of the stuff they've already done that I think are telltale signs they get that. But 2025 it just was a snowballing effect. Like, it's like in like when you do that shimmy, like Parkman doing that shimmy, and then he gets traded and it makes the women in Cleveland puke, if you know what I mean with that reference. But when it's all going bad, you look for the worst, even worse out of it. So those are the offensive struggles. We also had some defensive shortcomings when it mattered. The takeaways dropped significantly. I think they were among the bottom third of the league in fewest turnovers, and really reduce those game swinging plays that we used to see at times. Pass rush was wholly ineffective outside of a couple stars. They finished the year tied for second 22nd, excuse me, in sacks, which is a big oof compared to where they've been with Spags. And that just led to too many sustained opposing drives and trouble on third down. So it's just bad all around on the defense. And then, the third phase of what was terrible, special teams woes. We had Butker had the worst year of his career. He missed several field goals, several kicks early in the season, in a stretch that saw Kansas City lose 2 games by a total of 9 points. Return teams really failed to just ever take the game into their own hands or help with field positioning. So really you just look at the missed field goals, mixed extra points, lack of explosive returns, really just threw more dirt onto the grave for the 2025 Chiefs. And on top of that, just the roster construction and talent gaps, like I said, that same run it back approach that we saw this front office take just did not work out this year. Playing a bit of armchair quarterback, looking back at some of the free agents and draft decisions, some just did not pan out, particularly where there was depth needed. And then that just made the issue even greater when there were problems down the road, and just only weakened the supporting cast as a whole. Looking at some signings like Elijah Mitchell. What the hell did they paid him? I don't even know. Paid him like $2 million. Never saw the field. Released him even after Pacheco went down. Christian Fulton gave him a pretty decent contract. What the hell did they use him for? I mean, he was a healthy scratch half of the year. And maybe some of it was, dynasty fatigue, maybe not. But bottom line, a lot needs to occur this offseason for the Chiefs to set the stage for a big bounce back in 2026. And that brings us to the meat and potatoes of why you guys are here. The 2026 Kingdom Keys for the offseason. First and foremost, I guess I'll say, I think that the Chiefs are in a unique position just given where they're at in the draft, and kind of where they're at and sort of the timeline of some of these core players. Like, it's time to kind of move on from some guys. So I think they're the canvas has been set for them to paint a picture to make the big changes, if you will, and turn the script, back quickly in this next season. They just have to they just got to execute this year, this offseason, understand what needs to be done, and just not rest on their laurels like they have in the past with that run it back approach. So first and foremost, and I think we've seen this some already, like I've kind of sprinkled throughout this, like we got to have some big culture changes with the staff. Already seeing the Chiefs attack that a little bit. They brought back Eric Bieniemy to be OC. I know that can be kind of a polarizing move for them because it's sort of like slapping some Flex Seal on it. Like, yeah, we're changing the culture, but it's just an older one that we used to have, but it was effective. Either way, I've always said this in videos, Nagy was a yes man, and I think we saw how that developed over time. Bieniemy, by all reports, holds players accountable. Very different coach from Andy Reid, and was not a yes man when they were doing scheming. And we did see how that offense looked with him. So I'm excited to see him come back into the fold. They hired Chad O'Shea to be their new wide receiver coach, which is a move I'm really excited about because, just look at the guy's history. He has a tremendous track record of developing wide receivers, has worked with some Hall of Fame wide receivers in the past. And that's just something that the Chiefs have not had on this staff in quite some time. I mean, I think their wide receiver coach that they just got rid of came from a high school in the area, which, I mean, tells you enough right there. And just really a lot of reports for that. Rashee Rice only developed thanks to D-Hop and Kelsey. And honestly, I believe it by just looking how things went. They got to tackle the salary cap effectively. That's key number 2. Right now, I mean, they're looking to having a pretty tight cap situation. Over the cap has them at approximately $62 million over right now. So that's going to require some smart maneuvering. They got to restructure contracts. Most definitely Mahomes and a few key other vets. They got to move off of a few higher cap players. Looking at, Juwan Taylor, Mike Dana, maybe even Tranquil. they got to also consider potentially trading a player. And I've said this on our hit squad show or the lockdown blitz, but I believe that they're definitely going to consider moving on from McDuffie. I think they can get a first round pick in a draft that is very plentiful in positional players or where they need needs. So I could see them making that type of move. But all in all, all those moves will give them the flexibility they need to address those needs. Okay, so this now we're moving on to third key. Are really these next two? I think are the two I'd say 1A, 1B. A lot of debate can happen on what needs to be 1A, but we're going to start with the pass rush first. This is definitely one of the bigger problems they've had this year, the inconsistent pass rush outside of Chris Jones, who's aging, and George Karlaftis. Really, they only got pressure from those two, and the lack of depth hurt them, later in games. They got to add a dynamic edge rusher, especially just looking at the guys that are free agents. Whether they sign someone in free agency or they do this early in the draft, it's got to be a top priority. Unfortunately, for the free agency route, there's not a whole lot of options out there. Just kind of looking at it, right? We'll dive into it later as things get going, but you're looking at like a Trey Hendrickson or a Draymond Jones are probably the two that would make an impact. And they're going to come a little costly, I'd imagine. You look at where they're at, number 9 in the draft. You could potentially Ruben Bain might make it. I doubt it, but he might. Someone like that. Not bad to spend the first round pick on, or even his running mate Hakeem Messidor in the second round. So I think if the Chiefs don't do it in free agency, they're definitely doing it early in the draft and getting an edge rusher. Number 2, they have to overhaul this rushing game. This is another must do for the Chiefs. They had literally, I think like 2 explosive runs all year. No true bell cow back. I think Pacheco, love the guy, very much exposed to have a complete lack of vision as a running back. And all of that really just put extra pressure on Mahomes and made this offense one-dimensional. You already got Mahomes hurt. He's rehabbing. What better way to help out a quarterback who's rehabbing and coming back from a big injury than to give him a running game to help open things up so that he doesn't have to be your leading rusher 14 out of 17 weeks. So they got to do that. They got to do it by either signing a premier running back in free agency or drafting a lead back high enough to contribute early. Free agency route, you're looking at Breece Hall, Travis Etienne, maybe, Kenneth Walker, pipe dreams, perhaps. I don't know, but those are pending free agents. That's the kind of fish I would like the Chiefs to reel in at running back. Or, we got that cat out of South Bend, Jeremiah Love, maybe early in the draft. I know that could be polarizing as well. So maybe not him or Nicholas Singleton later on. Either way, they got to spend some early capital if they don't address it in free agency, because you cannot come back with Pacheco and Kareem Hunt and expect things to be better. You just can't. They got to fix the O-line consistency and depth. Like I noted, just the injuries and inconsistency as a whole hurt both the run game and the pass pro. I think they have their core in place from left tackle to right guard, but they got to figure out what they're doing at right tackle. I think no doubt Juwan Taylor's 100% being cut from the Chiefs. Free up's like $20 million, so that's a no-brainer. But does that mean that they ride with Jalen Moore, who they give him a shot, who they did sign last year? They can't really move on from him, so I think he's probably getting the shot. But I don't know if they want to put all their eggs in that basket. Looking at the draft, I don't think there's going to be an offensive tackle at number 9 for them to consider without grossly overreaching. So I think that they need to add another versatile offensive tackle in free agency, whether that's a Cam Robinson, maybe, a Braden Smith if they feel that Jalen Moore is better as a swing guy. I don't know. But they got to address that if they're not fully confident in Moore, and then they got to draft O-line help just for depth and future starting roles later in the draft. And then finally, they got to determine, what is the core vets' futures with this team? Like what is happening with Travis Kelce? Is he retiring? Is he not? Is he going to come back on a team-friendly deal? He is a free agent right now. Just big, quick hitter on that. I don't think Kelsey's retiring. I think he's coming back, especially with the hiring of Bieniemy. I think he's going to give it at least one more shot. And he's still been a pretty effective tight end, so I see that. But other than that, I mean, they got to assess, what vets are worth keeping versus which ones are expendable so that they can rebuild with younger talent. Talking about your Drew Tranquils, maybe Mike Dana, Trent McDuffie. Do they try to get a big haul for him? Those are things that are going to be considered, and I hope that they're considering because we need to have big changes for 2026 to be a different vibe than 2025 was. But as a whole, that kind of wraps up the Kingdom Keys, our 2025 recap. Quick overview of what needs to happen. We are certainly going to be diving into it deeper and deeper as this offseason ramps up. And I'm sure things will be trickling in, pretty much weekly from here on out, just given the changes, hopefully gross changes we're seeing with the Chiefs. I think it will be an exciting time, an exciting offseason, and we'll find out what happens. But as always, you want to find me or other Hit Squad members, there's our social info. If you want to find the Lockdown Defense content, there's our info across all social media platforms. But really, this wraps up, this chapter of the Kingdom for 2025. I thank you all for listening to Kingdom Keys, where we break down what was and unlock what's next, from the good, to the bad, and to what comes next. This has been Kingdom Keys with the Real AG. We'll see you back next year, or later on this year, I should say. The same kingdom, but new locks in 2026. Peace.